For readers of novels in which the denouement is drawn out, you don't have to really know this word, but you can infer based on the sentence that we're dealing with the end of this novel. Every loose plot neatly wrapped up. So this is the ending, in which the ending is drawn out. So these really long endings, all the various little stories are told and neatly ended. Compared to this, we have the short story. It often has a blank feel, at least for readers of novels. And this contrast is very subtle. But the idea is, again, for people who are used to one thing, when they see this other thing, they see it, in or feel about it a certain way that's different. And then, of course, what's the different about it? Well, it doesn't have this long, drawn-out ending. So therefore, does it have a meandering feel? It doesn't get to the point. Well, something is long and drawn out. In a way, it is meandering. So we want something that's really the opposite of meandering, something that is along the lines of a short story often feels like it just ends suddenly. Interminable, again, is the opposite of that. It just keeps going and going. That might describe the novel, but definitely not the short story. Understated, this is a good trap because you think of under and stating, you state something in words. So if you understate something, you don't say as much of it. So definitely a good trap. It's kind of a vocab thing here because understated is slightly different than that. To have an understated manner is a way that is subtle. You're not trying to draw attention to yourself. I mean, the opposite of this would be something like loud and brash, not interminable or meandering or going on and on. So let's look at D. The short story often has an unfinished feel to it. It ends abruptly, unlike the novel that keeps going and going and making sure everything has a very finished, neatly wrapped up feel to it. Short stories, the opposite. So that is our answer. E, retrospective, just means looking back at the past, and that doesn't really fit this context. Here we have this pretty complex sentence. Let's read it. That the word bloviate, originally used to describe how this president spoke pompously and at length. Those are our two clues. It's still most often employed in a political context, shows that politicians are still prone to forsake. What does this phrase mean? They are likely to give up or to not use. It's a simpler way of saying it. Blank speech. So they are still prone to not using speech. That is the opposite of the two clues that I underlined here. So honest. When you speak honest, are you speaking the opposite of pompously and at length? Well, I imagine pompous. You stick your chest out. I'm so important. I'm going to speak at length about something. Let's say I took the GRE and I got a perfect score on both sections. That might be the truth. It depends on who's saying that. But they can drone on pompously about that. But that doesn't mean it can't be honest. So we can get rid of A. I notice I would say that when you see politician, the opposite of honest oftentimes jumps to mind. So make sure you don't make that knee-jerk choice. B, humorous. Politicians are still prone to forsake humorous speech. Well, I mean, you can speak pompously and at length and maybe make some humorous remarks. It just doesn't sound like it's contrasted enough to pompous and at length. So we'll get rid of it. Improvisational. If something is improvisational, it might be short. You come up with it on the spot, but that's not part of the definition of improvisational. Direct. Something is direct is definitely not at length. Someone who speaks pompously speaks again in a way that's very self-important and contrasts a bit with direct, and at length definitely contrasts with direct. So that's a pretty strong answer. Finally, illogical. If this were logical, you could have an argument. They forsake logical speech, which tends to be coherent and succinct. Illogical is the opposite of that, so we don't really even have to worry about that, and the answer is D.
This prompt requires taking some time to notice the structure of this short but dense sentence. The word given in the first clause introduces an idea that we need to assume to be true for the statements in the rest of the sentence. This idea is going to serve as our backdrop or context. So our passage tells us that the political climate was one of unthinking hyperbole, meaning that politicians thoughtlessly exaggerate. Now, within this climate, we have one senator who takes a nuanced position. His position is subtle and more complex. And the author goes on to tell us that the senator's position has clear partisan leanings, but despite his apparent political preferences, or his political preferences being quite apparent, the senator's position is still a striking or remarkable or noticeable example of something that we need to figure out. So in a climate where politicians thoughtlessly exaggerate a subtle and complex position, a well thought out position is going to be unusual. It's going to be an anomaly, a striking difference from what others are doing. Now, I'll quickly explain why the other choices do not work. So a provocation would be a position that inflames or aggravates, and the partisan leanings might suggest that the senator's position aggravates those with different political views or inflames the debate, but we know that the political climate is already one of unthinking hyperbole. It's already quite volatile. So the senator's more nuanced position would likely not be viewed as a remarkable or striking provocation in the midst of rampant, unthinking hyperbole. So let's eliminate this one. As compared to thoughtless exaggeration, a nuanced position would be viewed as more thoughtful, more sophisticated, the opposite of oversimplification, so we can eliminate this one. Now, equivocation is appealing. It would mean that the senator's position is ambiguous or perhaps even shifty or vague. Being nuanced where everyone else is bluntly over the top might lead to charges of equivocation, but we have to remember that the senator's position has clear partisan leanings, so we know which side of the political debate he stands on, so we can eliminate this one. Now, endorsement also is tempting. The partisan leanings might suggest that he's giving his backing or support to a particular political view. But again, we have to remember that this is taking place in the context of unthinking hyperbole. And we can assume, we can reasonably infer, that other politicians are endorsing their political views. They're strongly stating them, even exaggerating them. So this senator's nuanced position would not stand out. So let's eliminate endorsement, leaving us with anomaly.
That the psychopharmacological, that is a massive word, 20 letters long, journal had already published the findings of the clinician's experiment rendered blank any prior misgivings she had regarding the validity of her control group. This is obviously a very hard text completion. Lots going on here. First of all, let's just kill that word. It's the journal. Make things easy. Now, she had misgivings, doubts. Oh God, I don't know. I'm kind of wondering if they're gonna publish here my work, because I'm doubting my work. This whole validity here. You don't have to worry exactly what that means, the validity of her control group. But the journal published her findings. So it rendered what? Well, kind of insignificant or trivial, or no longer really important, because you're worried they weren't going to publish you. They did. So your worries are moot, no longer really at issue because you've been published. Extant, still in existence, doesn't work. Fallacious means erroneous, but it wasn't that the fact that they published it rendered erroneous her misgivings or her doubts. Doesn't make sense. Topical means pertaining to a certain issue, usually a timely or relevant one. And retroactive means kind of applying backwards, and that doesn't really work here. Getting on something meaning it's no longer a big deal and it's moot. There's our answer. Revolutions do little to cure a nation's blank. The very agitation that allowed for a change in previous rule often precludes the formation of a viable government. So this is a tricky question. And we want to first off look for some keywords here that come after the blank. So the agitation that allowed for a change in previous rule. So what is it that the nation is troubling the nation here? What do they need to a cure for? And it's this agitation. The sentence goes on to elaborate here. Agitation that allowed for change in previous rule often prevents formation of a viable government. And so revolution wants a working government, but this agitation, this restlessness that comes from this wanting a change in government rarely leads to a functioning government. So you can see that this word has to mean agitation or restlessness. Now let's look here at jingoism. Jingoism is this idea of an excessive patriotism. You're thumping your chest, saying how great your country is. Nowhere in the sentence do we have words that support such a strong word as jingoism. Paranoia is also a very strong word. Again, we want something similar to agitation. Paranoia is too extreme. Restiveness, on the other hand, though it sounds like rest, means rest. Oops, let me underline that. There we go. Though it sounds like rest, it actually means restlessness. And of course, GRE loves this word. So there's our answer. Euphoria is a feeling of extreme happiness. That doesn't work. And cupidity is greed. Again, nothing to support this answer choice. And restiveness it is.